The story you're about to hear is a work of fiction. The characters, the school, the events, they were all created to share a message about kindness that feels more real today than ever. It's a reminder that in the grand theater of life, the most powerful moments are often the quietest, and the true heroes are the ones we don't even see. Hook. In a world of unimaginable power and privilege, her tears were simply invisible. The quiet sobs of a little girl, lost in a marble hallway built for the children of the elite, were just another sound in a place humming with ambition. Her pain was a ghost, unseen, unheard, unfelt. The teachers rushing to class didn't see her. The other students, with their expensive uniforms, didn't see her. Even her own mother, who had just ducked around the corner to take a call worth millions, didn't see her. Her tears were invisible to everyone, except for the one person that nobody ever noticed. He was a man who lived in the shadows of this gleaming institution, a man whose presence was only felt in the clean floors left behind. And as he stopped his cart, he reached inside, not for a mop or a spray, but for a small, unassuming bottle of bubbles. Section 1, The Janitor's World. Our story really begins miles away from the shining halls of Kensington Preparatory Academy. It starts in the dim light of a small apartment where the smell of bleach and bargain detergent always hung in the air. This was Daniel Turner's world. Long before the sun even thought about rising, Daniel was up. His day didn't start with a smart alarm or fresh espresso, but with the quiet creak of a floorboard he knew by heart, a sound he'd perfected to keep from waking his 10-year-old son, Leo. At 42, Daniel was a man whose life story was written on his hands. They were a roadmap of calluses and faint scars from years of hard work, but they still moved with a surprising gentleness. His face, often etched with a quiet weariness, could still break into a smile that lit up his eyes, a flicker of the man he used to be, and the man he still was, deep down. He'd been a teacher once. An elementary school teacher, passionate about sparking curiosity in young minds. He could make history feel like an adventure and science feel like magic. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. His wife's sudden illness, and the mountain of medical bills that came with it, had swallowed everything, his savings, their home, and finally, his career. He found himself adrift, a single father to a young boy who had just lost his mom. The need for a steady paycheck, any paycheck, crushed the luxury of chasing a passion. So, he took the job at Kensington Prep. A janitor. The irony wasn't lost on him. He now cleaned the floors of a world he once hoped to shape, a world where kids had every advantage he couldn't give his own son. His mornings were a ritual of love and careful math. He'd pack Leo's lunch, a sandwich, an apple, and always a cartoon he'd drawn on the napkin, a small gift from a father who had little else to give. He'd help Leo with his homework, the old teacher in him explaining fractions with slices of toast. Their bond was everything, a fortress of love they'd built together. Leo was a bright kid, resilient, and he understood their situation with a maturity that made Daniel's heart both swell with pride and ache with pain. He never asked for the new sneakers or the latest video games his friends had. He only ever asked for his dad's time. As Daniel put on his drab, gray uniform, he'd sometimes catch his reflection. He didn't see a janitor. He saw a father. A survivor. A man doing what had to be done. His work was just a way to keep a roof over Leo's head. And it was a thankless job. He was a ghost, moving through the school, erasing the day's messes, making their world perfect while his own felt broken. He knew the names of the kids who left sticky handprints on the glass doors and the teachers who always spilled coffee, but none of them knew his. To them, he was just the janitor. Tucked in his pocket, next to his keys and a folded picture of his late wife and Leo, Daniel always kept a small bottle of soap bubbles. It was a leftover from Leo's younger days, a simple trick he'd used to distract his son from scraped knees and temper tantrums. Most days he forgot it was even there, but he never took it out. It was a little plastic reminder of a simpler kind of magic, the kind that didn't cost a thing. Section 2, The Billionaire's World. Miles away, in a penthouse that looked down on the rest of the city, a very different morning was unfolding. This was the world of Olivia Kensington and her mother, Charlotte. If Daniel's world was defined by limits, the Kensingtons' was defined by a lack of them. Charlotte was a titan of industry, a self-made billionaire who had built a tech empire from nothing. Her name meant power, innovation, and ruthless success. Her life was a color-coded schedule of board meetings, international calls, and strategic takeovers, all planned to the minute. Charlotte loved her daughter, Olivia, with a fierce, protective fire. That love was the engine for her ambition. She was determined to give Olivia everything she never had: security, opportunity, the absolute best of everything. And the best meant Kensington Prep, a school with tuition that could buy a house. It meant designer clothes, private tutors, and a future without a single financial worry. She was building a fortress of privilege around Olivia, brick by expensive brick, sure that this was the ultimate expression of a mother's love. But in her race to secure Olivia's future, she was missing her present. Mornings were a blur. Charlotte's attention was always split between Olivia's chatter and the urgent emails flashing on her tablet. She saw her daughter's life as a project to be managed: get top grades, schedule enriching activities, secure an Ivy League spot. The subtle currents of childhood anxiety, the quiet loneliness, those were data points she kept missing. This morning was no different. Olivia, a small 7-year-old with wide, observant eyes, tried to show her mother a drawing. It was a picture of the two of them holding hands under a big, colorful sun. Charlotte, deep in a call about a merger in Tokyo, glanced at it, offered a distracted, "That's lovely, sweetheart," and turned right back to her screen. The slight, though she didn't mean it to be, landed like a stone in Olivia's chest. She felt that familiar ache of loneliness, the feeling of being a side note in her own mother's story. That feeling followed her to school. Kensington Prep was beautiful, all soaring glass walls and perfect courtyards. But to Olivia, it just felt big and cold. It was another one of her mother's possessions, a place she was supposed to be, but not a place she felt she belonged. She was a quiet, sensitive kid, easily overwhelmed by the noisy confidence of her classmates, who all seemed to have been born with a manual for this life that she'd never received. The breaking point came during a school assembly for Parent-Child Career Day. The proud smiles of her classmates, sitting next to their lawyer dads and surgeon moms, felt like a spotlight on her own empty seat. Her mother was supposed to be there, but a last-minute crisis in Europe had pulled her away. An apologetic text was all Olivia got. The very public emptiness of that chair confirmed her deepest fear: she was all alone. The noise, the lights, the applause, it all became too much. A knot of panic tightened in her throat. She had to get out. Slipping out of the crowd, she ran, not knowing where she was going, until she found herself in a deserted, echoing hallway, where she collapsed onto a cold bench and finally let the tears fall. Section 3, The Collision of Worlds. Daniel Turner was pushing his cart down the West Wing corridor. It was an area mostly for administrative offices, usually empty during assemblies. The polished marble floors, a source of both pride and endless work for him, reflected the cold light from the high windows. His mind was a million miles away, trying to figure out if he could stretch his next paycheck to cover new sneakers for Leo. His son's current pair were more tape than shoe. That's when he heard it. It wasn't loud. It was a small, heartbreaking sound. A quiet, rhythmic sob, nearly swallowed by the empty space. Daniel froze. He looked around, scanning the hall. And then he saw her. A little girl, huddled on a bench, her small shoulders shaking. He recognized the uniform immediately. This was Olivia Kensington. Her face was buried in her hands, a picture of pure misery. Daniel's first instinct, born from years of being invisible, was to just keep moving. Talking to the students wasn't his job. In fact, it was frowned upon. He was staff. She was a client. A very, very important client. Getting involved could mean losing the job he desperately needed. He thought of Leo. He should just turn his cart around and pretend he saw nothing. But then, another instinct took over. The father. The teacher. The man who knew exactly what it felt like to be small and alone in a world that was way too big. He didn't see the daughter of the famous Charlotte Kensington, he saw a kid who was hurting. And he just couldn't walk away. It wasn't in him. Meanwhile, just around the corner, hidden by a marble pillar, Charlotte Kensington hung up her phone. The deal was done. A wave of triumphant relief washed over her, the thrill of the win. She had just secured another piece of her daughter's future. Smiling, she turned the corner, ready to find Olivia, apologize for missing the assembly, and make it all better with the promise of a trip to Paris or a new pony. But the sight that greeted her made her freeze. She saw Olivia on the bench, crying, and her heart clenched with guilt. But before she could rush over, she saw him. The janitor. She watched as he walked toward her daughter, and a wave of protective anger surged through her. Who was this man? What did he want? She stayed hidden, her body tensed, ready to spring into action. She watched as Daniel slowly, carefully, walked to the bench. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood a respectful distance away. Olivia, lost in her own storm, didn't seem to notice. Daniel knelt down, not to Olivia's level, but to his cart's. His movements were slow, deliberate. Charlotte held her breath as he rummaged inside. What was he getting? But it wasn't a tool he pulled out. It was a small, plastic bottle. He unscrewed the cap and pulled out the little wand. He looked at the crying girl with pure empathy in his eyes. Without a word, he dipped the wand, brought it to his lips, and gently blew. The first bubble emerged, a perfect, shimmering sphere. It wobbled in the air, catching the light and reflecting the cold hallway in a swirl of rainbow colors. It drifted silently, magically, toward Olivia, popping with a faint whisper right beside her tear-stained cheek. Olivia's sobs hitched. She lifted her head, her eyes red and puffy. She saw another bubble float by, then another, and another. A silent, sparkling fleet was sailing down the hall, turning the sterile space into something enchanted. Daniel kept blowing, his face a mask of calm concentration, creating a gentle ballet of bubbles. A tiny, watery smile started to form on Olivia's lips. She reached out and gently poked one of the spheres, which vanished in a puff of mist. She forgot her sadness, forgot the empty chair, forgot everything. For that one moment, she was completely captivated. She looked at the man kneeling on the floor, this quiet man in a gray uniform, and she didn't see a janitor. She saw a magician. From behind the pillar, Charlotte watched it all. The anger and suspicion vanished, replaced by a confusing, overwhelming storm of her own emotions. She saw the genuine, uncomplicated kindness in his actions. He didn't want anything. He was simply a man who saw a sad child and offered the only comfort he had. She watched the real smile return to her daughter's face, not a smile coaxed by a gift, but one born from a moment of pure, gentle connection. And then, the crushing realization hit her. This man, this stranger, this janitor, had done what she, with all her power and wealth, had failed to do. He had calmed her daughter not with money or influence, but with his presence, with his empathy, and with a 25-cent bottle of soap. The fortress she built around her own heart began to crack. She was the CEO of a global empire, but in that moment, she felt like a complete failure as a mother. Section 4, The Summons and the Fear. Daniel didn't linger. As soon as he saw Olivia's tears had been replaced by quiet wonder, he gave her a small nod, put his bubbles away, and pushed his cart down the hall. He was relieved the girl was okay, but a new feeling started to creep in, anxiety. He had broken the unspoken rule. He'd interacted with a student, and not just any student. What if someone reported him? What if Mrs. Kensington found out? The thought sent a chill down his spine. He was going to lose everything over a bottle of bubbles. The rest of his shift was a blur. Every footstep in the hall made him jump. His heart pounded with every announcement over the intercom. He just wanted to clock out, go home, and hug Leo. Finally, the end-of-day bell rang. He was cleaning his supplies when his supervisor walked up, a grim look on his face. "Turner," he said, his voice flat. "The headmaster wants to see you." "His office. Now." Daniel's stomach dropped. This was it. Someone saw him with Olivia Kensington, and now he was going to be fired. He pictured Leo's face, the rent that was due, the fragile life they'd built about to be shattered. The long walk to the headmaster's office felt like a march to his own execution. He knocked on the heavy oak door, his hand trembling. "Come in." Daniel walked into the massive office. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a huge desk dominated the room. Behind it sat Headmaster Thompson, his expression unreadable. But it wasn't the headmaster that made Daniel's blood run cold. It was the other person in the room. Sitting in a leather chair, posture perfect, was Charlotte Kensington. "Mr. Turner," Headmaster Thompson began, his voice formal and cold. "Please, sit. Mrs. Kensington would like a word." Daniel perched on the edge of the chair, clasping his hands together to keep them from shaking. He stared at the floor, avoiding Charlotte's gaze. He was a janitor. She was a billionaire. They were from different planets. He braced himself for the yelling, for the accusation that he'd upset her daughter. Charlotte let the silence hang in the air, studying the terrified man in front of her. "Mr. Turner," she finally said, her voice quieter than he expected. "I believe you were in the West Wing corridor around 2 o'clock. Daniel swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am. I was, doing my rounds." "And you saw my daughter, Olivia," she stated. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am," he whispered. He decided to just tell the truth. She was crying. "I'm sorry if I overstepped. I just wanted to help. I didn't mean any harm, I swear. It won't happen again. Please, I need this job." He finally looked up at her, and the raw fear in his eyes hit Charlotte harder than she expected. This man was terrified of losing his entire livelihood because he'd shown her child a moment of kindness. Headmaster Thompson shifted, ready to fire Daniel on the spot if that's what Mrs. Kensington wanted. The school couldn't risk upsetting its biggest donor. But Charlotte held up a hand, silencing him. She leaned forward, her intense gaze softening. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice losing its corporate edge. "I'm not here to fire you. I'm here because I was there. I was around the corner. I saw everything." Daniel just stared at her, completely confused. "I saw my daughter having a panic attack," Charlotte explained, her voice now tinged with humility. "A child who has professionals to help her with her anxiety. And I saw you, a total stranger, calm her down in under a minute. You didn't talk to her. You didn't touch her. You just blew bubbles." She paused. "I want to know why. What made you do that?" Daniel was stunned. This was not the conversation he'd braced for. He looked at this powerful woman, who now just seemed like a worried mom. He thought of Leo. My son," he began, his voice getting a little stronger. "When he was little, after his mom passed away, he'd have these moments. Big feelings he couldn't control. Words just made it worse. But bubbles." He looked down at his hands. "You can't really be sad when you're watching a bubble. It's impossible. It gives your brain a second to reset. It's quiet. Gentle." He looked back at Charlotte. "I saw your daughter, and she looked just like my Leo used to. I figured it might help. I'm sorry if I was wrong." Charlotte leaned back, a profound realization dawning on her. This man, with his simple wisdom born from love and loss, understood something about her daughter that she had completely missed. She'd been trying to solve Olivia's sadness with solutions and gifts, treating her daughter's heart like a business problem. This janitor had treated it like something fragile that just needed a moment of peace. "You weren't wrong, Mr. Turner," she said softly. "You were more right than anyone has been in a long time." She turned to the stunned headmaster. "I'm funding a new wellness center for this school. We've been interviewing candidates for months, people with PhDs and long resumes. I think we've been looking for the wrong qualifications." She turned her gaze back to Daniel, and for the first time, she really saw him. Not the janitor, but the man. The father. The teacher. "Mr. Turner," she said, her voice clear and certain. "How would you like a new job?" Section 5, The Reward and the Resolution. Daniel Turner just stared at Charlotte Kensington, certain he'd heard her wrong. The words, "new job," echoed in the fancy office, but they made no sense. It felt like the world had just flipped upside down. One second he was about to be unemployed, the next he was being offered something. I don't understand, ma'am," he stammered. Charlotte actually smiled, a real smile that made her face seem warm and approachable. "It's simple, Mr. Turner. This school, for all its resources, is missing heart. It's so focused on achievement that it forgets these are still just kids. Kids with big feelings, as you put it." She went on, her voice filled with a new energy. "What you did for Olivia, that wasn't just bubbles. That was empathy. Intuition. That's a skill worth more than any degree. I'm creating a new position, Director of Student Wellness. And I want you to be the one to fill it." Headmaster Thompson's jaw nearly hit his desk. He looked from the billionaire to the janitor and back again, his face a mask of disbelief. Daniel was speechless. "Director? Ma'am, I'm a janitor. I clean floors. I have an old teaching certificate, but—" "You're a father," Charlotte interjected gently. "You're a man who, despite everything he's been through, showed kindness to a child he didn't know, for no reason other than to be kind. You're the most qualified person I can imagine. Your job won't be about discipline or curriculum. It will be to be there. To create a safe space. To be a quiet presence. To blow bubbles if you have to. To remind everyone here that a student's well-being is just as important as their test scores."